Hi, I'm Liselle and welcome back to my channel where I talk about all things writing, traditional publishing, and a little bit of reading. And today I'm here to talk about Aeon Timeline. So in my writing process, I use a variety of technologies to put together my stories. I've been using Plotter to help me a lot with my plotting, and also using Notion for my world building and a lot of that part of my writing process. And I was really looking for something that could help me with timelines, because in my latest series, A Master of Monsters, which is a young adult dark academia fantasy series, I have a lot of characters, I have a lot of different timelines and things that I'm working with, and I really wanted something that could help give me a better representation of that. And both a friend had recommended Aeon Timeline in the past, and I had completely forgotten that he recommended it until another commenter had recommended it as well. And so I decided to give it a shot and try it out. And so this video is really me sharing the applications of the program, talking about it, giving you an overview, showing you how I've been using it, and as well as sharing kind of the pros and cons and whether this is something that I would recommend. So that's what the entirety of this video is about. There are timestamps if you want to jump around to the sections that you're most interested in, and there will also be like an on-screen portion where I will show you the program on screen and run through it with you as well. And so Aeon Timeline, this is a software that basically has a lot of different applications, can be used for a lot of different industries, but it does have specific sort of narrative items that you can use if you are an author that is put aside for you. And so it is a paid program. It's 65 USD in order to kind of own the program forever. But if you want access to updates beyond the first year, you have to pay 35 USD each year. I have been using Aeon Timeline for I think over a year now, and I haven't paid attention honestly to any of the updates nor noticed any difference in my workflow for not updating it regularly. So I don't know that I would say that's a big deal, as opposed to a program like Plotter that has, you know, fairly frequent updates that are very significant add-ons to the software. I haven't really noticed any big difference in the Aeon Timeline software, but I am perhaps maybe using it in a way that's pretty light and you'll see that as I talk about it a little bit more. But that is the program, and it is essentially to kind of give you a way to map, you could map different ideas, and I'm using it really for the timeline function specifically. And so that's everything that this video is going to be about. It does also have a 14-day trial, so if you see this video and you think that you want to try it out, you can try it out for 14 days for free before it prompts you for payment. So with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump into the on-screen demo and discussion of Aeon Timeline. And after that, I will come back and talk about the pros and cons and also share who I would recommend this program for. Welcome to the Aeon Timeline interface. I'm going to go over the different components sort of high level with you to begin with, and then I'll talk in more detail about the different options, and then I will get into specifically how I've been using this system, and hopefully that will help you have a general idea of what is possible with this program. Let's begin with talking about the timeline. So this is the space where all your different events will show up. As you can see, I have a Mastery of Monsters here. Just a few chapters, I guess their contents will be spoiled for you, but otherwise nothing else. So you can see that over here. Up on this top left section are all the different types of views. So there are different ways that you can view your timeline. You can view it in a mind map or this subway, or based on the relationships, or a spreadsheet view. There are all different options for you. Also, if you have opened this, starting your document in a narrative timeline from the beginning, you will also have options to see a narrative timeline and an outline timeline. And I'm going to talk to you about the differences between these two in more detail a little bit later. And over here on the side, you have this sidebar, which I have open right now. You can also close it if you like, but I have it open. And so you have the option to search. So if you want to search for certain things, you can filter the timeline if you only want to see certain types, certain colors, if you have a color coding system you're using, or certain dates if you want to filter it that way. And you can create different views that you can go through. So that's that. And then you also have a section for characters where you can list out your different characters. You have a section for locations, and then you have a section where you can put in your different item types. So item types can really be whatever your heart desires. In my case, because I knew that I wanted to group the timeline so that I could see what the historical events were stacked on top of what I call the pre-book modern events. So events that happen before the book starts, but in a modern timeline. I also wanted to be able to see the events of the different books that are involved in the series, and I wanted to see them all on one timeline. And I didn't want them to just be chronological. I wanted to see them in their different sections. This would also be helpful if you have overlapping events in different books, or if you go back and forth in time in different books. I don't do that in my books, but this setup would also have allowed me to do that. I just kind of wanted to have the header to separate them. And so in order to do that, I had to create different item types. So if you want to create a new item type, what you have to do is you go in this ... section here, where it says item type options, and then you click item type settings, and then you can add an item type. So if you go here, you can click add, and now you have a different item type. You can give it a name, you can choose an icon, you can add a default sort of color, and you can decide if you want it to be in a manual order, by label, by color, by start date, that sort of thing. And so that's what the item type is. So over here, I can just go ahead and delete that. And this narrative item type is only available if you have set up the document to use the narrative timelines. So that's what that is. And so these are your different item types, just so we can kind of understand that. And I'll click OK. And so also, if you go on the timeline, this is where you can see the different sort of display types. So let's go to this group section. So this is how I've made it do this grouping. So it has grouped the item types in this sort of stacked format. And so that's basically what this is. So if I get rid of, for example, I take off historical, now historical isn't showing up anymore. Put back in historical, now historical is showing up. So that's essentially how I have set these up. And so you have a layout as well. These are the different layouts. Right now I have an expanded layout, and so that's how it's showing up like this. When I changed it to the other layouts, it wasn't really doing it. And so I unfortunately can't really show you this one, because I think I already expanded all of these. It wouldn't let me put them back up, but you can click them over here and you can expand them. And I would go into the other books, but then there would be spoilers. So just know that you have different types of layouts that you can use. And then there's also item types. So again, these are the different item types that I have. So for example, if you hadn't grouped the timeline to be like this by item types and you had everything on one timeline, you might decide that you don't want to see certain things, and then you can uncheck these. And then the item display, so this is how the individual cards that are here display. So you can do it in all sorts of different things. These kind of show you all the different items that you could have in there. So you could have links, you could have images, you could have different tags. Like if you wanted to tag a chapter and say maybe this is like a tense chapter, and you wanted to take all your tense chapters that have sort of high emotional beats, then you could tag it that way, and then you could see those tags. You could see the characters that are in the different chapters. If you tagged the characters to be in different chapters, you could see the location, those sorts of things. Any attachments that you might have attached to the card, I don't have any attachments, so I don't have any of those properties. So for example, that's kind of how you would see everything together. If I had attached characters or a location or attached one of these to that book. So that's that. And then on the bottom here, you can see you can scroll along the timeline as well if you want. It has this sort of change scrollable date range. So you could change the date range. Right now it's set from infinite to infinite. You could show it to, you could change whatever range that you want. You could also go into these date settings and you can change how you want the date settings to be. So the week starts on Sunday. You might want to change it so the week starts on Monday, which is usually something I like, but I just didn't do that in this case. So those are kind of the options that you have. You also can change the time scale. So I have it to show basically based on days, but if you wanted to see decades at a time, you might change that scrolling as well. So those are those. And then in the card itself, let's choose this one. So in the card itself, you have a bunch of information here as well. So you can set the color if you wanted to change the color. This shows the item type that it's under. So it's under a Mastery of Monsters, but you could change it if you wanted to. The parent of it is prologue. So this is a scene under the prologue. So this is the prologue chapter. This is a scene that happens under it. And then you can choose a start and end date. I just choose the start date. Usually by default, it fills in the end date. And then if you wanted to, you could choose a time duration. You could say if you wanted to check this as ongoing or not. There are also more date options that you have as well in here. And then you could tag certain relationships here where you can put additional tags if you wanted to. So if I wanted to put this as, maybe I want to tag all the scary moments that happen. So now I've tagged it. It's a scary moment now. I could put it in a summary as well if I wanted to. And again, going back to that item display, I could change it to show, where did it go? Properties, to show the tags. And now you can see it's tagged as scary. So if you wanted to have the tags there, you could take it that way. And now you can see it. So I'll get rid of that, get rid of that tag. And those are all the options. So that's kind of the high level overview of everything that is available in this timeline spread and all the different options and things that you have in there. Now I want to talk about the narrative timeline view. When I first opened this program, I didn't realize the narrative timeline view was an option. So I just went ahead with this timeline and I made it work for me. But for the purposes of this video, I wanted to start a new document with the narrative timeline view so I could see if that was something that might be useful for me and also for you to be able to see it. So this is the narrative view. So you have a narrative view here. You have an outline view as well if you want to see it this way. And then you have different types here. So if you go into the item type settings and go to narrative, you can see section labels. So I added some new sections here. So I added a Save the Cat section because this is how I like to organize my books, by the Save the Cat sections. But they have some in here for you. So they have different books, they have acts, prologue, epilogue, scene, sub-scene, that sort of thing. And you can also choose your numbering system. So if you want it to do this sort of continuous style, scene 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, where items for each section are numbered independently. Or you could do this outline style where it would do 1.1, 1.2, that sort of thing. But I like the book continuous style, so let's do that. And here with the sections, it also has some guidelines for you. So to list it from the largest section to the smallest. So that's how it's arranged in that section, whether you want it to be a folder or a different type. So there's that, and we'll press OK. So the first challenge I came up against is that you'll see in those item types I had in the other timeline view, I had ones that weren't part of books in the series. So I had that historical, pre-series, that sort of thing. So I did try and add that in here, and I created a non-book section for it. But the first kind of issue I came up against is that the numbering system is a little bit odd for this. So for example, here's book 2. This is A Clash of Carnivores, the second book in the Mastery Monsters series. So I added in a new act, and you can see it has counted it as act 4. However, this isn't act 4. This is a new act in a new book, but it's not counting it independently. And maybe this is possible in the program and I just don't know how to do it. But when I went in here, I couldn't tell how to make it understand that even though this is book 2 and it understands that it's a second book, it's not counting it as a separate act. It's counting it as act 4, which is annoying. So that was my first kind of thing I came up against that I didn't like, but I plowed on. So here's the prologue. It does understand that when you do a prologue, the next chapter should be chapter 1. It should not be chapter 2. So that's great. It understands this is prologue 1, this is chapter 1, and it goes forward. But here you'll see another numbering issue. So it has counted this as scene 1, and then when you go down here, I have my next scene, it's counted as scene 2. But to me, I would count this as beginning again scene 1, because there's only one scene in this chapter. This is a new chapter with a new scene, but it's counting continuously. And so that is where I was like, oh, I don't super love that. So then you go to the timeline view. So here's the timeline view, and you can see here the different cards. So you'll see the difference in how I've arranged this on the other timeline versus how this is arranged here. So for example, you cannot see at a glance what chapter this is part of. You can only see what scene it's part of. And if you go to the item display, so you can see all the different properties again. I'm going to get rid of those. I want to see here, it says the narrative position. So that's what is showing scene 1. But when you clicked into it, over down here, you can see book 1, act 1, save the cat, section 1, prologue 1, scene 1. This is kind of what I would have expected to see up front here, but it doesn't show it, and it doesn't really group things together in that way. Which is kind of upsetting. And again, grouping items in the timeline, it's not really possible there. It's just kind of in the item display. You can pick the narrative folder, and that's what it's going to give you, which I found frustrating and didn't like. And so this was at the point where I decided, oh yeah, even if I had had access to the narrative outline, I wouldn't have used this in the beginning because it really just doesn't work for my purposes. But I wanted to show you the narrative timeline so you can see what it looks like and you can understand how you might want to use it, just in case you do. Let's go back to this timeline over here, and I can show you how I do use this system. So how I have these here, and we'll go to a Mastery of Monsters, is I have the chapter, and I have the scene that happens in the chapter, and I have the dates of those. So over here, we have chapter 1, and we have, this is the scene that happens in it, August at the nightclub, and that's the date for the scene. And now you'll see over here, I've created a relation. And so creating a relation to a character shows you what age the character is at this specific point in time. So that is why in this character section, I don't have every character. I just have characters whose birthday I care about and whose age I care about knowing in the timeline. So I just have certain characters. And so when I put in a character here, under the start and end date, under the start date and both the end date, I've put their birth date. If I wanted to, I guess I could put their death day and then you could see the full duration of them as a person, but I've just put their birth date. And so when I go into this timeline and I add this relation here, it now shows me how old that character is at that specific time, which is very useful for my purposes in understanding how old each character is at each time, especially because this story is spanning multiple years. I want to be able to know how old a certain character is at a certain point in time. So that is the purpose of me having those characters in there and having those relations. And that is really the breadth of how I'm using this. I just wanted to be able to see, okay, where is the chapter? Where are the scenes happening in time in those chapters? I wanted to see the entire span of the chapter. So how long that whole chapter is going. So you can see from Friday to Saturday is where this chapter is happening and the things that are happening in that chapter, and being able to tell what is the character's birth date at that time. That was all I wanted from this. And so that is all I've put together, and that's all I've had on the timeline. Now I'm going to show you how to set this up yourself, kind of step by step, in case this is something you want to do and you want to emulate the system that I have set up. So the first thing is to add in that item type. So you want to go down here and then item type settings. And then here we'll add our item type. So let's say we want to do Mastery of Monsters book 4. Imagine there is a book 4. There isn't, but sure, imagine there's a book 4. So then we put that in there. I copy over this name to the plural. I don't understand what this is, but if you don't copy it over, it won't show up properly in the timeline. So copy it over there, choose your icon. Let's choose this one with all the people, choose a little color. Let's choose blue, allow dates. So yes. And then you want to click in here, timeline view. You want it to show up in the timeline view. And so click there to make sure it's going to show up in the timeline view, because otherwise it won't show up on the timeline. You can also choose how you want it to sort. So we can say by start date if we want to, or maybe by color is how I've been using them. So that's that. Allow parent types. Yes, from this one. And then we'll click OK. So now we're good to go. We click in here and we want to see it here with the rest of our groups. So if we scroll to the bottom and we click groups and we add it right there in the checklist. So now it'll show up at the bottom. So let's put in a chapter. So if we want to do, for example, chapter 1, and you'll see it's not showing up on the timeline yet because there's no date assigned to it. So you can leave it like that. You can put a date on it, but if you want to put scenes underneath, so for example, you put scene 1. So the date of scene 1 is going to be, let's say, February 3rd. Okay. And now you see scene 1 automatically shows up on the timeline because it has a date assigned to it. And I want to put scene 1 under chapter 1. So you just drag and drop it. And now chapter 1 appears on the timeline because now it has a, why is this not going down? Am I not clicking it properly? There we go. Now it has a child that is underneath it. And so it has a scene 1. And so now chapter 1 has taken on the date. So, and then if you wanted to add, say, scene 2, and you wanted to add another scene, and let's say that one takes place on February 5th, see it shows up there, and then I want to drag it in here, and now you'll see chapter 1 has automatically expanded in order to encompass both the scene 1 and scene 2. And so that is how it has put itself together. It calculates it as well, so you can kind of know the dates between, but I don't know why it does 3 to 5 instead of being inclusive of 6. And I'm not sure how to make that happen. So that is how it does that. But now you can see you have the chapter, you have the scene, you have scene 2 if you want to do another. So you could do chapter 2, and then you could do scene 1 again. This scene 1 happens on the 9th, let's say. Pull it down there and then slide it over to chapter 1 and open that up. And now you have chapter 2, scene 1 down here. And so this is kind of, you can see the difference between this and how the narrative timeline was set up. The narrative timeline wouldn't have that parent-child relationship so that you could see all of this in this specific way. So now you have that over there. And if you, for example, if scene 1 actually happened, let's say scene 1 happened on the 5th somehow, it would go down over here and it would go underneath to represent that it's happening within that timeline, just in case. So say you had chapter 2 from a different character's perspective and they were overlapping in that way, now you can see that it is represented on the timeline as well. So that is how I've set that up. That's how that I've used that. And hopefully that helps give you an overview and understanding. I am using this in a very limited way, which I will talk about more when I talk about the sort of pros and cons. But that is basically how I use Aeon Timeline. Let's talk about what I consider to be the pros of Aeon Timeline. So for me, the pros are having that visual timeline format. I'm a person that really benefits from being able to see things in visual blocks and also being able to move around those blocks at will. And that's what I really like about Aeon Timeline, is getting to see all the different ways that the dates are arranged and having it drop down by chapter, all of that. I really like that layout. And I especially like, as I mentioned before, I especially like the fact that I can add in the birthdays and I can check the birth dates. That was something that I honestly didn't even really know that I needed a tool for, or wouldn't have thought about getting a tool for. And then once I had the tool, I was like, oh, this is amazing. This is so helpful to my process, because I'd previously written stories with very short timelines. And so I really didn't need to keep track of birthdays in that way. But when I was doing a series like this that has so many different birthdays, it was really useful for me to be able to track that. And so I thought that was really helpful. And I do like that it has a lot of different ways that you can kind of arrange things. I would say there is a little bit of a learning curve when you first get into it, because it's just kind of laid out and it's sort of kind of like, okay, where do I go from here? It does have templates. I just find that I tend to be adverse to using templates. I'm that sort of person where I'll like get something and I'll ignore the instructions at first and try to just figure it out myself. I don't know why I'm like that, so maybe that's why. Yeah, it's one of those things that has so many different applications that you have to kind of figure out how you want to use it. But I do appreciate when programs are like that, because it does give you a lot of flexibility in what you can do. And now for the cons. I continue to be confused as to why I cannot get a calendar option for anything, for any of these programs. I truly just want a calendar option so desperately. It is baffling to me that a program that is about like helping you track time and has this timeline doesn't give you the option to view everything in a calendar view. I just don't understand it. I don't know why that isn't a thing. And I think to me, that's the biggest hang up with this. And that's what doesn't make it, you know, a sort of perfect thing for me, is I really want to have a calendar view. And that has been my struggle for many years, is wanting to have a calendar view for planning stories and not being able to get it. In the past, I had used Google Calendars itself for doing it, but it was really bad and it like got confused with my own personal Google Calendars and it was just a big mess. I don't like having to manually put things into a calendar. I really just want something self-contained, and I hoped that this would be good enough with the timeline, but I did find myself just constantly just wishing I had a calendar. And to me, that's kind of the biggest drawback of Aeon Timeline. I find myself continuing to want a solution that can give me that calendar, all the plotting things. I really desperately want something that feels like more of an all-in-one world building solution. I think this has aspects that can work really well for world building, but it's not quite there. It's not quite giving you absolutely everything you might need to build a world. And I feel like that's my biggest struggle with Aeon Timeline. I also find that narrative view, as I showed you in the demo, is much more limited than I thought it would be, and difficult for that sort of planning. I think if you had one file and you just wanted one file for one book and you were just going to plan it that way, it would make a little bit more sense. It's a little bit more straightforward. But I felt that for planning a series with a lot of history and different things going on, it just quite wasn't meeting the mark for me. So those are what I would say are the cons of the system. And finally, I'll talk about whether or not I would recommend Aeon Timeline. And I am sort of. It is difficult, but I do think my answer to this is no. Which I kind of feel bad about saying because I am using it. I'm actively using it in my writing. Like, I use it for the Mastery of Monsters series. I've been using it to put together the timelines. And at this point, when I'm, very close to, I'm going to be doing my third book and kind of finishing that off, I don't see myself using a different system at this point because I'm kind of already pot committed at this point in time. And so I will continue to use Aeon Timeline, but I just feel like there has to be a better solution that is more of an all-in-one solution that allows you to have a more complete world building sort of package. And that is something that I continue to look for. I think when I go on to my next fantasy project and I'm wanting to plot something that's high fantasy, that's something I'm looking at because I'm wanting to do a romantasy project. My plan is not to use Aeon Timeline for the timeline features. I really want to try out a different program and to find something that can really combine both what I'm doing in Notion with all of my different character profiles and my histories, etc., and also combine that with what I am doing in Aeon Timeline with giving me a timeline, but giving me a calendar. Oh, a calendar, please. Giving me a calendar to work with. I just feel like there is a better solution, and I feel like Aeon Timeline is an appropriate band-aid. I think if you are in a situation in which you really desperately just need something to help you track time right now and you don't know what else you could possibly use, and you are either in a position where you have money to burn or you are an author and you are going to write this purchase off as a business expense, then I think it's worth it to get it just so you can have something because it is useful. I think the features it has are really helpful for you if you are just looking for something to track time. I just think at that price point of $65, even if you have it forever, I just think of other programs. Like, I think of something like a Scrivener that has a similar price point to own it forever, but I feel like you get so much more out of Scrivener than you would get out of Aeon Timeline. In that Scrivener, you get a whole word processor. It feels more significant than what you are getting from Aeon Timeline, at least in the very limited way in which I am using it, because I am using Aeon Timeline in a very surface way. Mind you, I will say that for many years, and I would say many people also use Scrivener in a similar way. You're only using a very small amount of the actual full availability of features. But that being said, it just feels like it is doing such a specific function that I find it hard to justify that price point if you're using it in such a specific way. And I find it difficult to recommend it to other people if you're going to use it in that specific way. I feel like at that point, it's kind of like there must be some other calendar or timeline function, especially if you have a simple timeline that you can use as opposed to Aeon Timeline. I think even anything else that had just like a plain calendar app, maybe even could manage it. But I don't know that it's doing such a good job that I would be like, yeah, sure, drop $65 on this. I don't really feel that strongly about it. I think if the price point was different, maybe I would, but I also think that the price point is as is because there's a much larger breadth of features that I'm not taking advantage of. So I think if you're just wanting the timeline, I just don't really think it's worth it. So I personally continue to be on the hunt for a better solution. I have seen something that I'm very interested in, and I am going to be trying it out and using it. And then down the line, after I've used it for a bit, I will do another review like this to let you know, because I like to give myself some time to use it. Like, I've been using Aeon Timeline, I said, now for, I would think, over a year at this point. And so it was a good point to kind of come and share my opinions. But this new program, I'll give it a little bit of time and see what I think about it. But yeah, that's my feelings about Aeon Timeline. I do think it is a really useful program, but I think the application in terms of what I've shown you is so specific as to not really justify using it if you are starting from scratch and not in a rush and don't have money to burn. So that's me and Aeon Timeline. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe. And if you are a user of Aeon Timeline and you have things to share, if there are things I missed that you want to share with me and other people, please feel free to do so. I'm not an expert on Aeon Timeline. I'm just kind of sharing my experience with it and giving a review on that basis to help you make a more informed decision about whether or not that's something you might want to use. So I'm completely open to other people being like, no, you're wrong, it does have a calendar function, or it can do this or can do that. I'm totally open to that, so please put that in the comments if you have a comment like that. But otherwise, thank you so much for watching. Bye!